Thanks, Simon. I'm not sure I can quite follow Chris in the same way, but I'll do my best. What I'm going to talk about is something completely different, actually. It's work we've been doing at Aldby Park at Buttercrambe in North Yorkshire. And this has primarily been a landscape assessment and earthwork survey project, the first phase of which began in 2020. And the work at Aldby Park is actually an ongoing project for the Society. Aldby Park is located on the western bank of the River Derwent, about 15 kilometres to the northeast of York. The park forms the northern edge of the village of Buttercrambe, and the estate has been the home of the Darley family since 1557. And we have to give our thanks to the Windarleys, the family who live there now, for allowing us to do all this work on the site. The present house that you can see in that image was built in 1726 by Jane Darley and her husband John Brewster, and replaced an earlier house that was located to its northeast, which we're lucky enough to have a depiction of in Samuel Buck's Yorkshire sketchbook from about 1720. So following the construction of the new house, the park and gardens were laid out around it, and they covered around 36 hectares, comprising grassland, clumps of trees, and more formal gardens closer to the house, including terraced lawns and a woodland garden. And it was the area of the woodland garden that you can see here in this image behind the house that was the initial focus of our survey work on the site. The fieldwork at Aldby was first initiated following a request from the Yorkshire Gardens Trust, who are undertaking a programme of research at the site. They were interested in particular in our thoughts on a double mounded feature in the woodland gardens east of the house, and that formed the initial focus of the survey work. There have been 5 main elements to the research so far, which has been an initial assessment of the archaeology and the documentary and cartographic evidence, analytical survey of the garden earthwork that I mentioned. There's been comparative survey work of Skippenbeck mound, which is on the other side of the Derwent, just across from Aldby. We've also undertaken some analytical survey of the settlement remains in Aldby Park. And finally, there's been some drone survey work undertaken to create a digital surface model of the park. It's also worth noting that a small area of geophysical survey work has been done in the formal gardens, undertaken by Alison Spencer and the PWAP team. And although the magnetometry survey didn't reveal evidence for the earlier mound, the earlier house, that's what we were looking for. But I think we're going to carry on and try and do some more different types of geophysical survey. So the assessment work, which was the first stage, was undertaken primarily by our very own Trevor Pearson and Tim Gates. And as I said, this was just looking at the documentary and cartographic evidence primarily, and also doing a walkover survey looking at the above ground archaeology. If you believe me, the trees and shrubs that you can see in this image here, there's a wonderful mounded earthwork feature underneath all those trees and shrubs. And it's actually all this cover that means that the monument is very poorly understood. In popular myth, it's the site of a Northumbrian royal residence where King Edwin escaped assassination in Easter of AD 620. And indeed, if you look at the OS map that I've got up here, you can see the site is marked as palace in the 19th century. And this claim of a royal palace first appeared in print at the end of the 16th century in the 1590s edition of Camden's Britannica. But the origins of this story are really unknown. The earliest depiction of the feature is that the map you can see here in 1633. And this is really a remarkable map, and when compared to modern mapping, is actually very accurate and is really quite exceptional for a map that's nearly 400 years old. Now, the assessment reports that I have up here that was produced by Trevor primarily concluded that this earthwork feature appears to have developed in 3 phases, beginning with a single mound that then was enlarged and elaborated over time, but there was no real tangible connection to King Edwin or indeed any early medieval archaeology at all. What the assessment report also highlighted, there was actually, perhaps surprisingly, no detailed survey of this garden feature at all. It was therefore decided that large-scale analytical survey would be done of the mound, and this was undertaken by society members with the aim of really adding to our understanding of the phasing and the origin of this feature. So the survey work was carried out in April 2021, and it identified sort of 4 key elements to the feature. And I hope your screens are big enough that you can see it written on the plan there. So on the northern side, there was a round mound, which was the earliest part of the monument. It was then joined by a sort of flat-topped, reversed J-shaped kind of bank, which ran up onto the skirt of the mound and therefore was later than the mound. On top of that bank, there was a sort of oval J-shaped mound, and then surrounding that was a flat-bottomed ditch, part of which had been infilled to the north. So what the survey did primarily was confirm that the round mound was indeed, as Trevor pointed out, the earliest feature on the site, and the other elements had been added to it at some point. Access to the mound was, or the sort of mounded garden feature was from the north via a ramp, and that ramp is depicted on the 1633 map, but also a causeway on the south side which crossed the ditches and went up via a stairway up onto the bank. Now this work, as I said, also provided an opportunity to consider the landscape setting of this quite unusual monument, and included making a survey of the second possibly related earthwork on the opposite side of the riverbank. This is in the parish of Skippenbeck, and it's been interpreted, in fact scheduled, as a castle motte. Our survey work, the plan that you can see here, clearly illustrates, however, that what we have here is a prehistoric round barrow, which has been created in a number of phases, so different elements of construction of the mound. And although this is similar in diameter to the mound in Aldby Park, it's much lower and smoother in character, and it stands no more than about 3.6 meters high. So the features, although in similar locations, are quite distinctively different in character. So the survey concluded that the garden feature created by the Darleys in the 16th or early 17th century was actually built by appropriating the remains of a Norman motte and bailey castle. The round mound that I've been discussing therefore represents the remains of a mutilated motte, with the bailey to the south-east largely obscured and overlain now by the large earthwork J-shaped bank. Trevor produced this splendid reconstruction illustration to give you an idea of how the site may have appeared when it was in the form of a motte and bailey castle. Now, a medieval castle at Aldby or Buttercrambe is undocumented, but that's really not unusual, with the bulk of 11th and 12th century castles actually unknown to history. As such, the origins of the site could be attributed to Hugh Fitzbaldrick, who was granted the estate by King William following the Norman conquest, or it may be it was constructed by the de Studeville family, who acquired the manor prior to King William's death in 1087. At the moment, it's impossible really to tie down any tighter than that who constructed this castle. What is clear, however, is that prior to the map of 1633, The Motte Bailey Castle, which actually sat next to the Darley's Manor House, was remodelled into a sort of fashionable garden feature comprising prospect mounds or vantage points, and a series of level terraces, so you can look out over the gardens and beyond, and fabulous view across the river towards the Wolds from here. You can see this photograph, which probably dates from the late 19th century, which shows the ditch and the terraces of the mound, which at that time were being cultivated as gardens. And it's this sort of continuing cultivation that's actually eroded the feature, so the terraces are not as sharp as they used to be. But again, we have this wonderful reconstruction that Trevor produced, which gives us a very clear idea of what the site may have looked like at the beginning of the 17th century. Now, there's a lot more information on this site in our reports. I just want to flag it up that it's a report number 54, and it's available on our webpage. So the fourth element of the fieldwork was to look at the settlement remains, which survive as really nice earthworks in the park. And we're really fortunate that the state map of 1633 shows at least some of the now lost buildings and building plots that were in the park. And that shows a sort of two different elements of the settlement. One along the road at Buttercrambe, where the existing settlement is, and one out in the park. Although the fieldwork in this area has been completed, the post sort of survey work hasn't been completed yet, so I can't show you a plan of this. But however, one of the most interesting things that's come out of this work so far is that the settlement remains both in the park and on the north side of the road actually overlie ridge and furrow ploughing. So again, we're seeing phases of development at the site, with these settlement plots put on top of what was originally agricultural land. Finally, Historic England also came out to Aldby Park and produced this digital surface model of the site using drone photography and photogrammetry. So using a series of overlapping aerial images, which they process in a bit of very clever software to produce this sort of 3D model of the site. The model is really accurately georeferenced, so we can overlay our survey data. And I hope you can just about see the red and green lines of our survey data on top of it. We've concentrated on just the settlement remains on the site. But what we can do by incorporating the digital model is start to pick up other elements of it. So all that ridge and furrow ploughing, instead of us walking up and down recording it on the ground, we can take it off this model, which will be fabulous. Now, the model doesn't record anything under the tree cover, which is why we have this huge, great big gap on one side with our earlier survey just floating within it. So there'd be a final phase of survey fieldwork this autumn when we'll go out and pick up all the other earthworks under the trees on that side. And that will give us hopefully just a wonderful plan of this great big area of parkland and all the medieval and later archaeology within it. Hopefully we'll also be undertaking some more geophysical survey out there, and we're going to sort of identify areas that we'd like to target for geophysical survey using our results of the earthwork survey. So watch this space. Hopefully there'll be more really interesting results to come from Aldby in the future.